6 months ago, I was a self-made millionaire, finalizing my retirement in a beachfront mansion in paradise. Today, I'm broke, living in a rented room in Ohio that smells of failure. I didn't lose my fortune in the stock market or a bad business deal. I was systematically dismantled, piece by piece, by a love story so perfect it could only be a lie. My life's work was the price of admission, and the exit cost me everything. This isn't a story for sympathy, it's a warning. My 30 years of boardroom victories didn't protect me, they made me the perfect target. If you are a successful man who thinks he can't be fooled, you are the person who needs to hear this the most. Subscribe now because the details of this scam are a masterclass in betrayal, and listening could save you everything you've ever worked for. You think it can't happen to you? That's what I thought. You've handled million-dollar deals, you've outsmarted competitors, you've built an empire. You're a king in your own world. But in this world, you're a novice. You're seen as a solution, not a man. You're a walking, talking retirement plan with a pulse, and the first test isn't a business proposal, it's a crisis. It begins with an emergency that only your money can solve, a test to see if you're a viable investor. And my test arrived in the form of a grainy photo and a desperate plea for help. Before the Philippines, there was Ohio. There was a sprawling 5-bedroom house that echoed with the ghost of a marriage that had died a slow, passionless death years before the divorce papers made it official. My ex-wife Cindy had called our life together comfortable, a word she spat out like it was a disease. In the end, she took half of everything and left me with the half that didn't matter. The business, the house, and a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. My days were a blur of logistics company logistics, a kingdom of spreadsheets and shipping routes I had built, but which now felt like a gilded cage I couldn't escape. Each morning was a carbon copy of the last. I'd wake up before dawn in that empty bed, put on the uniform of a man who'd already won his battles, a crisp shirt, tailored slacks, and drive to an office where I was respected, but not known. I was the boss, a figurehead moving through a sea of younger faces who saw me as part of the building's architecture, not a living, breathing man. The work that had once filled me with a sense of purpose, of building something real, had become a soulless routine. I was managing the decline, not just of my company's growth prospects, but of my own life force. My life had become a sterile, beige waiting room for death. The weekends were the worst. The structured silence of the office gave way to an unstructured, gaping void. I'd find chores to do, mowing the perfectly manicured lawn, cleaning the pool nobody swam in. Anything to fend off the crushing realization of my own isolation. Sometimes I'd drive to a steakhouse and eat alone at the bar, listening to the laughter of other families, feeling completely invisible. I was a ghost haunting the life I had built, a success story with no one to tell it to, a man who had everything and nothing at all. That feeling of being unseen was the real cancer. To my employees, I was the paycheck. To my ex-wife, I had become a financial obligation. To the world, I was just another aging man in a nice car. I hadn't felt the warmth of a woman's genuine affection, the simple feeling of being wanted for who I was, in over a decade. The business acumen and the 7-figure net worth were an armor that had become a prison, isolating me from the very thing I started to crave more than any deal, a real human connection. I was starving for a life that felt less like a balance sheet. And that's when the idea first took root. A tiny, dangerous seed of hope planted in the barren soil of my loneliness. It started with late-night internet searches, a digital escape from the gray Ohio winter. I stumbled upon forums, blogs, and videos of men just like me, men who had traded in their snow boots for sandals. They spoke of a place where the sun was always warm, the cost of living was low, and the women appreciated a man who had worked hard and built something. The Philippines. It wasn't just a country, it was a concept, a promise that my life wasn't over. It was the possibility of a second act, and I was about to write myself into the lead role. The first crack in the gray facade of my life appeared on a laptop screen. The Ohio winter was raging outside, but inside, I'd found a digital rabbit hole labeled expat life. I started with Europe, but it felt too familiar, too expensive. Then I stumbled onto Southeast Asia, the Philippines. It was a kaleidoscope of color and warmth that stood in stark defiance of my monochrome existence. Forums were filled with testimonials from men who sounded just like me, divorced, tired, and looking for more than a golf course to see out their days. It was less a place and more an idea, a digital oasis that promised life hadn't run its course just yet. My research became an obsession. I devoured hours of YouTube videos, watching sun-weathered men in their 50s and 60s, beer in hand, narrating their new lives from beachfront balconies. They spoke of a culture where respect for elders was still a virtue, where a man's hard work was admired, not resented. They'd show their grocery bills, a week's worth of fresh food for what I'd spend on a single steak dinner. The visual evidence was overwhelming. Vibrant markets, smiling locals, and a pace of life that seemed designed to heal a wounded soul. I wasn't just watching videos. I was studying a blueprint for my own resurrection. This wasn't some midlife crisis whim. It was a sound business decision. That's what I told myself. I ran the numbers like I was analyzing a new logistics route. My $1 million retirement fund, which provided a comfortable but unremarkable life in Ohio, would make me a king in the Philippines. I could build a custom home, hire staff, and live with a level of freedom I could only dream of back home. It was the ultimate arbitrage play, trading a high-cost, low-return emotional landscape for one with infinite upside. I was leveraging my assets to acquire not a company, but a life. The logic felt ironclad. The fantasy was incomplete. A palace is still a prison if you're alone in it. My online research shifted from real estate to relationships. The thought of dating in Ohio was exhausting, a minefield of jaded women my age. The expat forums all pointed in one direction: Filipinas. They were described in almost mythical terms: loyal, family-oriented, and genuinely attracted to older Western men. The profiles on the dating sites I reluctantly joined confirmed it. They weren't looking for an equal. They were looking for a leader, a provider. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was the prize. Her name was Rosalie. Her profile picture wasn't professionally done like some of the others. It was a simple, slightly blurry photo of her smiling in a garden, a genuine warmth radiating from it. Her bio was short, just a few lines about loving her family and wanting a simple, happy life. It felt real. For days, I just looked at her profile, drafting and deleting messages, terrified of saying the wrong thing. Finally, I crafted what I thought was the perfect, non-threatening opener. My finger hovered over the send button, my heart pounding like it was my first ever sales call. And then a notification pinged on my screen. It was a message from her. Her message, just a few simple words, was a detonation in the silent, gray museum of my life. I saw you were looking at my profile. You have a kind smile. It wasn't clever or flirtatious. It was simple, direct, and it felt like a ray of pure sunlight piercing through the perpetual Ohio winter of my soul. I read it 10, 20 times. A kind smile. Cindy used to say my smile was a negotiation tactic. For the first time in years, someone saw a man, not a transaction. That night, the sprawling house didn't feel so empty. It felt like a launch pad, the place from which my real life was about to begin. The digital world had suddenly become more real than the physical one. We moved from messages to video calls almost immediately. And there she was. She wasn't just a blurry photo anymore. She was a living, breathing person whose laughter filled the speakers of my laptop and echoed in my cavernous, empty kitchen. Her name, Rosalie, felt like poetry on my lips. She'd listen, her chin propped on her hands, as I talked about the logistics business, a topic that would have put my ex-wife into a coma. But Rosalie was fascinated. She made me feel like the man who built the pyramids, not just a guy who shipped car parts. Each call was a jolt of pure life, a reminder of a man I had forgotten I could be. After 2 weeks of talking for hours every day, the distance became unbearable. The digital connection was a powerful anesthetic for my loneliness, but I wanted the real thing. I announced my intentions like a CEO unveiling a new strategic direction. Rosalie, I'm coming to see you. I booked a first-class ticket to Manila without a second thought. The cost, which would have once been a line item to analyze, felt insignificant. It was an investment in my own happiness, a capital expenditure on a future I could finally see clearly. The Ohio office, the spreadsheets, the entire gray world could run itself for a while. The king was leaving his sterile castle to visit his queen. The moment I stepped out of the Manila airport, the humidity and the chaotic energy of the city hit me like a physical force. It was a world away from the orderly, predictable rhythm of Ohio. And then I saw her, standing just beyond the barrier, holding a small, hand-drawn sign with my name on it. She was even more beautiful in person, her smile so bright it seemed to generate its own light. When she stepped forward and gave me a shy hug, the scent of jasmine in her hair, it felt like the final scene of a movie I'd been watching my whole life. I wasn't an aging businessman on a trip. I was the protagonist, and my second act had just officially begun. We spent the first week in a place called Palawan, an island paradise that made any travel brochure look like a lie. The sand was whiter, the water was clearer, and the sky was a shade of blue I didn't know existed. But the scenery was just a backdrop to Rosalie's affection. It was a constant, gentle, and overwhelming tide. She'd hold my hand as we walked along the beach, her fingers intertwined with mine as if they belonged there. She'd pack a lunch, and we'd take a boat to a deserted island, just the two of us. At night, I'd fall asleep to the sound of the ocean, a woman who adored me in my arms, and I felt a sense of peace that $1 million balance sheet had never given me. With Rosalie, the years just seemed to melt away. I wasn't Robert, the 57-year-old owner of a mid-sized logistics firm anymore. I was Bobby, a man who was climbing to the top of a hidden waterfall, laughing as the cool water washed over us. I was riding on the back of a rented scooter, my arms wrapped tightly around her waist, feeling the wind in my thinning hair and a thrill I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. The stiffness in my joints from years of sitting in boardrooms seemed to vanish, replaced by a youthful energy I thought was long gone.
She saw me not as old, but as experienced, not as cautious, but as wise. And her belief in me was so powerful, I started to believe it myself. I became the absolute center of her universe, and it was the most intoxicating drug I'd ever experienced. Back home, I was used to competing for attention, with my ex-wife's social calendar, with my employees' deadlines, with the constant demands of a business. With Rosalie, there was no competition. When I spoke, she listened, her eyes fixed on mine, hanging on every word. There was no scrolling through a phone, no while watching television. She made my stories about inventory management and shipping lanes sound like epic poems. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just being heard, I was being revered. I was not just a provider, I was the hero of the story. Every single day felt like a scene from a perfectly scripted romance movie, and I was the undisputed leading man. One day, she'd surprise me with a trip to an underground river. The next, she'd arrange for a private dinner on the beach, complete with candles dug into the sand. Each moment was more magical, more impossibly perfect than the last. It was as if she had a production assistant whispering in her ear, telling her exactly what to do to capture the hero's heart completely. I was so caught up in the performance, so mesmerized by the role I was playing, that I never stopped to ask who wrote the script. I was just happy to be the star. The invitation to meet her family felt like the natural next step in our perfect movie. It was a sign of her commitment, a chance for me to see her world and for them to meet the man who was going to change it. I saw it as a charming, almost theatrical part of the process. I embraced the role of the benevolent patriarch, the wealthy Westerner arriving to bestow gifts and goodwill. I spent a small fortune in the city on toys for the children, new appliances for the house, and crisp bills to hand out. I wasn't just visiting as a boyfriend, I was arriving as a savior, ready for my triumphant entrance. The welcome I received in her small provincial village was overwhelming. It was a full-blown ceremony. I was Sir Robert, an honored guest treated with a level of deference and respect that bordered on worship. The best pieces of food were piled onto my plate, the most comfortable chair was brought out for me, and the entire family, from the smallest child to the oldest grandmother, seemed to hang on my every word. It was a stark, heady contrast to the cynical indifference of my own world, where my success was often a source of envy or expectation. Here, it was a source of celebration, and I was the guest of honor at the feast. That trip to her village cemented the entire fantasy. My life in Ohio, with its cold silences and transactional relationships, felt like a black and white film compared to the vibrant technicolor of this new reality. Here, I wasn't just a man with money. I was a man with a purpose. My wealth wasn't a burden or a target. It was a tool I could use to create genuine happiness, to lift an entire family. The return on investment wasn't in dollars, it was in the adoring smiles, the endless gratitude, and the profound sense of belonging.
I had finally found a place where I wasn't just valued for what I had, but loved for who I was. Flying back to Ohio felt like traveling backward in time, leaving a world of vibrant life for a grayscale purgatory. My mind was made up. I was going to sell the company, liquidate my assets, and move to the Philippines to build a new life, a new house, a new dynasty with Rosalie. Every memory of our time together was a confirmation, a data point proving the soundness of my decision.
The whole thing was just so perfect, a flawless narrative leading to a happy ending. Looking back, I should have realized that it was too good to be true, that the screenplay was a little too polished. But I was the hero of the movie, and I desperately wanted to believe in the fairy tale ending I was being sold. The return to Ohio was like landing on a different planet. The technicolor dream of the Philippines faded back into the muted grayscale of my old life, and the only thing connecting me to that vibrant reality was a laptop screen. The calls with Rosalie continued, but something had shifted. The carefree laughter was still there, but it was now punctuated by sighs and moments of troubled silence. The first fissure in the dam of my financial reservoir appeared a week after I got back. It wasn't a demand, but a tearful confession. Her mother had a painful tooth infection and was too proud to ask for help. But Rosalie couldn't bear to see her suffer. The amount was trivial, a few $100s, just a tiny, insignificant crack. I almost felt a sense of relief. The request wasn't a red flag, it was an opportunity. Back in Ohio, I felt powerless, disconnected from the life I was planning. Sending that money was a tangible action, a way for me to perform my role as the provider, the man who could solve problems from 8,000 miles away. I wired the funds instantly, telling her it was the least I could do. I wasn't just sending money for a tooth. I was sending proof of my commitment. I saw it not as a withdrawal from my account, but as a deposit into our future. It was the best investment I'd ever made. A couple of weeks later, another problem surfaced. This time it was her brother. His tricycle, his only source of income to support his own young family, had broken down. The engine needed a specific part, and without it, he was losing money every day. Rosalie explained the situation with an air of profound apology, as if she were ashamed to bring another family problem to my doorstep. She stressed how her brother was a proud man who just needed a hand up, not a handout. The amount was a bit more this time, but the logic was compelling. It was a business problem, and I was a businessman. I rationalized it instantly. This wasn't charity. It was a strategic investment in the family's economic stability. I was a logistics expert, and I understood that a broken-down vehicle meant a broken supply chain. By fixing the tricycle, I wasn't just helping her brother. I was reinforcing the entire family unit, making them more self-sufficient, which would ultimately benefit Rosalie and our future together. I sent the money, picturing myself not as a sucker, but as a savvy portfolio manager diversifying his assets. I wasn't losing money. I was investing in human potential and mitigating future risk. Another small crack, another perfect justification. The next request came with a sense of manufactured urgency that should have set off alarms. A sudden storm had damaged the roof of the family home. Rosalie sent me grainy pictures of a water-stained ceiling, her messages filled with panic about the upcoming rainy season. This wasn't about a tooth or a tricycle anymore. This was about their safety, their shelter. The request felt different, heavier. It was the first time the number had 4 digits. It was presented as an emergency that only a man of my means and decisiveness could handle swiftly. A part of me, the cautious businessman I used to be, felt a brief tremor of unease. The feeling was fleeting, quickly overpowered by the role I was so eager to play, the protector. I was going to build a brand new house for us soon, so what was a few thousand for a roof repair? It was a down payment on my future, a way to protect the family I was about to officially join. I saw it as a test of my character, and I was determined to pass with flying colors. I transferred the funds, visualizing the patched roof not as an expense, but as a shield I had provided. Then the nature of the request pivoted from emergencies to opportunities. Her cousin, a bright young man, had the chance to secure a high-paying job in Dubai, but he needed to pay a substantial placement fee to a recruitment agency. Rosalie presented this as a collaborative investment. The cousin would be able to send significant money back home, lifting the entire family, and, she added, ensuring we wouldn't have to worry about them in the future. The fee would, of course, be paid back to me in installments once he started working. It was a business proposal, complete with a projected ROI.
My logical mind, the one that built a logistics empire, actually admired the strategy. It was a classic leverage play, a one-time capital injection to unlock a new, recurring revenue stream for the family unit. It would reduce their dependency and, by extension, future calls on my own resources. It was a brilliant, self-liquidating plan. I wasn't being a wallet, I was acting as an angel investor, seeding a venture that would pay dividends for years to come. I sent the money, feeling like a shrewd venture capitalist funding a promising startup, pleased with my own financial acumen. After that, a certain rhythm was established.
The financial requests became a normalized part of our long-distance relationship, a steady, predictable drip.
The emergency fund for her mother's toothache quietly transformed into a recurring monthly expense for medications and checkups. It was never a large amount, just a couple of $100s here and there, but it was constant. It was a small, almost imperceptible leak, but the drip was incessant, a constant flow from my vast reservoir of capital into the dry soil of her family's needs. The cracks were no longer individual events. They were beginning to connect. I barely even noticed it because I had already filed it away in a neat mental category. It was a family stipend, a responsible-sounding term I created to make it feel like a structured, manageable expense. What kind of man, after all, would deny an old woman her medicine? Questioning it would have felt cruel, ungenerous. It was what any good man, any future husband, would do.
I was providing for my new family, taking on the responsibilities I had craved. The constant drip wasn't a sign of a problem. It was the sound of me being a good, reliable partner. The biggest test yet came cloaked in the language of honor and injustice. Her father, a man who had been a quiet, peripheral figure in the background of our calls, was suddenly at the center of a crisis. A corrupt local official, as Rosalie described him, was attempting to seize a piece of the family's ancestral land through a fraudulent legal claim. The family's name and their entire legacy were at stake. They needed to hire a good lawyer, an expensive one, to fight back immediately. This wasn't about neediness, it was about warfare. It was a defense of everything they held dear. This request resonated with me on a primal level. It wasn't about sickness or poverty, it was about a fight. It was a hostile takeover attempt, and my entire career had been about winning those battles. This was an opportunity to be more than just a provider. I could be a warrior, a defender of the family's honor. I felt a surge of adrenaline, of purpose. I wasn't just wiring money, I was deploying assets to a strategic battlefront. I sent the largest sum to date without hesitation, feeling not depleted but powerful. I had just protected my future family from a corporate raid, proving my worth as the CEO they needed. My financial dam was now riddled with fissures, but I was too busy admiring the view to notice the structure was about to collapse. The successful defense of her family's land, funded by my capital, shifted the entire dynamic of our conversations. The constant stream of small financial fires was replaced by a single, blazing ambition. Rosalie began to speak of a permanent solution, a place of our own where we would be untouchable. She painted a vivid picture of a small plot of land, a fortress of our own making, insulated from corrupt officials and the endless, draining needs of others. It was presented not as a romantic fantasy, but as a strategic necessity, the final move in our campaign to secure a peaceful future, and it felt like the only logical conclusion. The abstract idea of land quickly blossomed into the concrete design of a house. My inbox filled with links to architectural styles, floor plans, and landscape designs. Rosalie would spend our video calls sharing her screen, walking me through a 3D model of a home she'd designed online, asking for my input on the master bedroom and the placement of the balcony where we'd watch the sunset. I was no longer just a distant benefactor, I was a co-creator, an architect of our shared destiny. This wasn't money disappearing into the ether for vague problems. This was steel, concrete, and glass. It was a tangible asset, a monument to my success and our love. Then came the manufactured heartbreak, the one legal wall that stood between us and our dream. Rosalie explained, with a performance of deep regret, that Philippine law forbids foreigners from owning land. She framed it as a tragic, impersonal, bureaucratic hurdle, not a personal red flag. The only way forward, she explained softly, was for the deed to be in her name. It would be our house, she swore, our home, but the paperwork had to be hers. She played the part perfectly,
portraying herself as the reluctant custodian of a dream I had to fund but could never legally own. My business mind, the very tool I believed made me sharp, became my undoing. I saw it not as a surrender of assets, but as a clever legal maneuver, a trust structure with her as the designated CEO. I had spent my life assessing partners and making calculated risks, and this felt like the ultimate test of my judgment.
To doubt her now would be to admit that everything, the love, the connection, the entire foundation of our future, was a lie. My ego couldn't accept that. Putting the property in her name wasn't a risk. It was the final, undeniable proof of my commitment, the seal on our unbreakable bond. The perfect plot of land materialized with suspicious speed. It was a beachfront property, just as we had dreamed, offered at a price that was presented as a once-in-a-lifetime deal that required immediate action. The cost was staggering. It represented nearly all the capital I had left from the sale of my company. This was the moment the endless stream of small requests had been leading to. It was the masterstroke. Rosalie presented the final sum with a trembling voice, as if she could barely comprehend the number herself. "This was our leap of faith," she said, "the one that would carry us over into paradise forever." I sat there in my silent Ohio office, the ghost of my former life surrounding me, while her face, filled with breathtaking hope, filled my computer screen. On my other monitor was my bank's wire transfer page, the fields all populated, her name, her bank, and a number that represented 30 years of my life's work. It wasn't just money, it was my past, my present, and all my hope for the future being bundled into a single digital package. This is how you build an empire, I told myself. You go all in. I took one last look at her tear-filled, grateful eyes and clicked send. The wire transfer was a final, deafening silence, a void where 30 years of my life had been. For a few hours, there was a strange, giddy peace. I had done it. I had jumped. I was all in. I emailed Rosalie, my hands trembling with a mixture of terror and adrenaline. "It's done. Our future is on its way." I expected an immediate, ecstatic call, a flood of tearful emojis. Instead, there was nothing. The digital line, which had been a torrent of constant communication, suddenly ran dry. The silence was louder than any alarm bell, a hollow echo in the new emptiness of my bank account. I spent the next 2 days in a state of suspended panic, manufacturing excuses for her. Maybe the bank was slow. Maybe she was out celebrating with her family, away from a good signal. When she finally answered a call, her voice was different, distant. The warmth was replaced by a cool, distracted efficiency. She said she was so busy with the lawyers and the paperwork that things were complicated. When I asked for a copy of the deed, just for my records, her tone sharpened. "It's not that simple, Bobby. You don't understand how things work here." It was the first time she'd ever made me feel like an outsider. My unease curdled into a sickness that sat in the pit of my stomach. I stopped sleeping. I just sat in my dark, empty Ohio house, staring at the laptop that had become my window into a world that was now refusing to look back. I started going back through our old conversations, our photos, desperately searching for the woman I had fallen in love with, but all I could see were the requests for money. The loving words were just the packaging around a transaction. My mind, the one that could spot a flaw in a logistics chain from a mile away, had been so focused on the destination that it never once inspected the vehicle. The breaking point came from the most mundane of places, Facebook. I don't know what made me do it, a final, desperate act of a drowning man. I searched a name she had mentioned once, a cousin. His profile was public. I scrolled through his pictures, a horrifying travelogue of my own foolishness. There was a picture of his new tricycle, my investment, a picture of the family on their repaired roof. It was all there, a documented history of my own fleecing, celebrated for all to see. The scenes from my romantic movie were now evidence in the trial of my stupidity. My frantic clicking led me to another profile linked from the cousin's page. It was a woman, smiling. It was Rosalie's smile, Rosalie's eyes, but the name was different. The profile was full of photos with another older white man, a portly Australian, both of them beaming. They were on a beach that looked suspiciously like the one in Palawan. I felt a disconnect, as if I were watching a movie about someone else. The man looked so happy, so blissfully unaware. He looked just like I had. The curtain wasn't just falling, it was being ripped away,
revealing the shoddy, pathetic set behind it. I scrolled down, my heart pounding a sick, frantic rhythm against my ribs. And then I saw it. The most recent post, dated just yesterday. It was a photo album titled, "Our New Family Home."
The cover picture was Rosalie, her entire family, and the portly Australian, all standing in front of a large, newly built house I had never seen before. They were all wearing matching t-shirts. On the shirts, printed under a cartoon graphic of the happy Australian, were the words, "Thank you to our sponsor." The world didn't just collapse, it evaporated. That picture on the screen wasn't just a photograph, it was a bill of sale for my soul, and I was listed as the product. The air in my lungs turned to ash. I was no longer a person, not Robert or Bobby. I was a sponsor, a line item on someone else's happily ever after. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand as I tried calling, but the number was already disconnected. The digital universe we had built, a world of constant pings and video calls, had been unplugged from the wall, plunging me into a silent, featureless void. The days that followed were a masterclass in impotence. I was a ghost, haunting the edges of a life I had funded. My attempts to contact Rosalie were met with a wall of silence, but my messages to her family members were answered. They were answered with laughing emojis, with pictures of the Australian man holding up a beer, with short, brutal messages telling me the party was over and I wasn't invited. The same people who had called me Sir Robert, who had piled my plate high with food, now treated me like a pesky insect they were trying to swat away. My remaining funds dwindled to nothing on international calls to lawyers who all gave me the same tired, pitying speech. The money was a gift. The land was not in my name. There was nothing to be done. I was a shipwrecked man standing on a desolate shore, watching the last pieces of his magnificent vessel, the one he had spent a lifetime building, slip beneath the waves. There was no rescue boat coming. There was only the vast, empty ocean of my own stupidity, stretching out to the horizon in every direction, and the bitter taste of salt on my lips. The final humiliation was the phone call. A call not to a lawyer or a business partner, but to my younger sister in Ohio, a woman I hadn't spoken to in years except for a perfunctory Christmas card. I had to swallow the jagged shards of my pride and ask her to buy me a plane ticket home. The man who had built a logistics empire from scratch couldn't even afford to transport himself. The journey to the Manila airport was a walk of shame through a city that now felt alien and hostile, every smiling face a cruel reminder of the one that had cost me everything. I stood at the same departure gate where I had once arrived, a king stepping into his new kingdom. Now I was just another broken man with a one-way ticket to a life I didn't want. I saw my reflection in the glass, a pale, hollowed-out version of the man who had stood there months before, his heart full of hope and his bank account full of a future. The confident smile was gone, replaced by the blank stare of a survivor who had lost everything, a man who had nothing left but the clothes on his back and the crushing weight of his own monumental failure. So if you're a man like me, a man who has built something, and you're sitting in a quiet house thinking that your business acumen is some kind of shield, you need to listen. If you're thinking of trading your lonely life for a tropical fantasy, understand this. Your lifetime of boardroom victories means nothing. In fact, it's your single greatest liability. Your ego, the one that tells you you're too smart to be fooled, is the very thing they will use to gut you. You think you're making a strategic investment in a new life. You're just the next sponsor. Let me ask you something. When that first request for emergency money comes, will you see it as a test of your wallet or a test of your heart? When she pitches you a small business, a piggery, or a store, will you feel like a venture capitalist or the sole funder of a project designed to fail? And when the big moment comes, the one where you sign over your life savings for a house in her name, will you see it as trust or a total asset transfer? It's not love, it's a business plan, and you're not the CEO. You're the liquidation event. I am a lighthouse now. That's all I have left. I'm a structure built from the rubble of my own shipwreck, and my only purpose is to flash a warning across the water for other ships heading toward these same rocks. I am not a success story. I am the story of failure, a cautionary tale told from a cheap room that smells like regret. You can choose to ignore my light, to believe your ship is stronger, faster, smarter. But know that the bottom of this ocean is crowded with men who thought the exact same thing right before the water closed over their heads.